Recording.
So my name is Thomas. I have joined the Eclipse Foundation since the beginning of the year. I work in the security team, and one of the tasks that we work on is making sure that the management of all the organizations of our projects hosted on GitHub is somehow more easily made with some tools, and on top of that, of course, also to improve the security posture of all these projects by making sure that certain settings or certain things are there that are normally required, or at least are best practice for open source projects. So we came up with this idea of doing a tool codenamed Otterdog that is able to serve as a kind of self-service for our projects by using a configuration as code approach. And I would like to introduce you to this tool so far. So basically, the design goals of the tool were that that it allows to define the configuration of resources on GitHub, also taking into account some default settings that we would like to see, so that we don't have to repeat all the settings for all projects all the time. And then, of course, you can, for each organization and each repository in these organizations, override the defaults. But ideally, of course, they would converge. In many cases, in some cases, it doesn't really make sense to have a default because every project is different. But for some things, it makes perfect sense. Accessing GitHub is actually quite well supported. So there are some APIs for that. However, some settings that are security related and are really interesting and necessary for how we manage organizations on GitHub can only be accessed by, for example, the web UI, which required this special tool to handle that a bit. But most of the settings are accessed by the REST API and the GraphQL API of GitHub, but this is a technical detail. One of the major design goals of the tool was that it's non-disruptive at setup time. So basically, it means that you as a user or a project member, you don't have to do anything to start using that tool. So we do everything for you. We set up all the necessary things. The current configuration will be imported automatically, and then you can start looking at the configuration and start modifying according to your needs. So one of the goals, of course, was to provide some kind of self-service for the projects. I perfectly understand that the way Eclipse Foundation manages all these projects might not be natural for everyone, but that's the way it is. And we would like to provide tools and other things to make your life easier. And so this is also one of our major design goals. And I think we managed to do something that is quite useful. One of the other goals, of course, was in order to support this kind of self-service without escalating developer privileges, which might be difficult for some projects. When imagine you have like hundreds of developers, you don't want to give each of them certain permissions in order to change things without auditing or checking whether this really makes sense. So for this cases, it's also very useful because you have to provide changes in the usual way with a pull request, for example, that can be reviewed, and once it's approved, things are going to be live on GitHub. So that's actually a pretty nice side effect. So as I already said before, there are some benefits of this approach, of course. One of the benefits that maybe some people miss sometimes is with this approach, you have a single single source of truth of all the changes with regard to resources on a GitHub organization, and it's fully documented. And so every request for a change or addition of a resource is documented with a pull request. Some comments are there. So that's usually quite nice. Otherwise, often you have to dig to some audit logs to understand why a certain setting has been made, or by whom, or when. And with this, this is, there's a lot more transparency about this. The other thing that is really nice, in my opinion, is it supports a consistent configuration of resources in an organization, or through all Eclipse projects that support that, simply because through the default configuration. So when you want to create, for example, a new repository, there are lots of settings that you can make in order to customize the repository to your needs. However, you have to do that. You have to do that manually through the web UI usually. Sometimes you miss a setting, or imagine you have a project with dozens of repositories, and keeping all the repositories consistent is quite some tedious task. So with the use of Otterdog and the self-configuration, self-service, this is, in my opinion, much more easy to achieve, because you immediately see the configuration of all repositories. You can even define templates that you reuse every time you create a new repository. And then basically all the settings that are defined in this template are being used automatically. But we will see this later in an example. Another thing that maybe it's easily missed is, of course, right now you can request new resources through the help desk in the GitLab instance of the Eclipse Foundation. However, it's not straightforward to verify that a request really comes from a member of the project. You have to always double check. You have to go to the project page. You have to check if the ID of the user matches and stuff like that. So with this approach that we use now for at least GitHub organizations, this is a bit simplified, because with the handle of the person that created the pull request, we can immediately verify if this person is a member of the project and which role he has. And based on that, we can adapt our approval process. But I will come to this later a bit to give you an understanding how we do this approval at the moment. Another thing that I find very important is with this approach, you make it visible what is the current resource configuration for a project. Right now, only certain privileged people have access to some information, or not even at all, or through some hoops. You can access various information in GitHub, but you have to use some APIs for that. It's not visibly publicly visible. With this configuration, you can immediately see all the relevant things that are important for you, and then can suggest changes, of course. And so that's a very nice side effect, in my opinion. Another thing that I noticed with this current approach that we have to how we allow project members to manage their organizations is only certain people have certain permissions to do some modifications on the repos at the moment. I think only the project leads, they have maintain rights that can do some changes to basic settings. I think one of the things that is quite overlooked here is that it's quite a tedious process in order to trigger a change to something. Imagine provide descriptions for all your repos, provide topics so that the repos are found by other tools. And you have to request that either via the help desk, which is tedious, or the project lead has a lot of things to do. Because they have to also check things like that, which they probably don't want to do all the time. So with this approach, basically everybody, every member of the project or outside contributors, they can create pull requests with providing information like that. So like descriptions. I've seen many repos that don't have any description, which is a bit of kind of sad, because in the end, it's very useful when you look at stuff. What is this all about? So with this approach, hopefully also this improves over time. People have less. It's easier for them to make changes that make perfect sense and are easy to do actually normally. Okay. Yeah. So we worked on this tool. It's, as I said, codenamed Otterdog. It's open source, of course, currently hosted in the GitLab instance of the Eclipse Foundation, but it's also mirrored on GitHub. I think we will consider moving it to GitHub completely at some point in time, but at the moment it's still on GitLab. You're also free to suggest changes or provide bug reports or whatever. So please do so if you encounter something. So what does the tool currently support? So of course, organizations with all their numerous settings, secrets, webhooks, then repositories. Repositories have all kinds of embedded resources like branch protection rules, repository webhooks, secrets, environments, full documentation of all the resources that are supported and all the properties that they include. You can find in this on this page. So there's a read the docs page that is a good reference for all the settings that are possible and what they actually mean. Yeah, take a look there, please. So what is the location of the configuration for your organization if you decide to use that? So what we will do is we create a repository in this organization. It's called .eclipse FDN. So following the convention that also GitHub uses for the special configuration repositories. So FDN, in case you are wondering what this means, it means a foundation as an abbreviation for a foundation, Eclipse Foundation repo. So and inside, yeah, here you see an example of the Eclipse CVI project. There's this repository. This repository currently contains mainly this configuration as code. It's using JSON-net format, which is already used by the Eclipse Foundation for other things like CI provisioning by Jenkins. So that was a logical way for us to do that also in this format. And then there's other information that is mainly there for creating automatically a page that I will show you later with some dashboard and playground that you can use. So this is automatically generated, and every time you make a change to this file and push these changes to the repository. So basically what is relevant for you is this Eclipse CVI JSON-net file. So of course, it's named differently for each organization. So in this case, it's called Eclipse CVI JSON-net, but in your case, it's your org-id.jsonnet. And this captures the whole configuration. Yeah, so that's the format. So here how it looks like. So at the top, it will include the default configuration. You don't have to touch that. It's automatically created normally. And then we use some template functions in order to create the different resources. Why do we use these template functions? Simply to be able to inherit the default values. So if you basically use a template function without any additional settings, you will just get the default values. But of course, your project will have some differences to the default, and you have to mention that in your configuration. Again, maybe it's important to mention here, you don't have to come up with something like this. So this will be automatically created with your current configuration. Then it's usually quite easy to adapt the existing configuration with new things that you would like to do. For example, a new repository, you just like copy paste existing things and adapt to your needs. Or I will show you later, there's also Playground in the web browser where you can test out the configuration changes and how do they actually in which result which result is basically then after making this change. Okay, some notes. Usually inside your JSON-net configuration, you will see the difference to the default configuration. As I already said, the default configuration is again publicly available, of course, on GitHub, posted in the Eclipse FDN organization. There's a repo, you can take a look there. Again, settings from the default configuration are taken, but of course can be overwritten to your needs. There are already a couple of enforcements that we apply, but these enforcements, they should not really be a problem for you right now. They are mainly about permissions on organizational level. For example, there's some setting if certain members can delete repositories, and of course we would like to enforce that to not allow that. So because that would be against our development process somehow. Here's again an example, as you have already seen. So how you can extend or override the settings from the default you just provide the setting that is different to from the default, and then provide the value for that. But yeah, it's just an example. So the default configuration, quick look how it looks like. You can take a look there. Also, when you go to the dashboard later on for your project, there's a quite nice way to show the values derived from the default configuration in some JSON format. So you don't have to actually go to this file. It's mainly for people that are interested in the technology, but not for users. So how does it work for you from a user perspective? So that's maybe the more interesting part. So for now, it was more like the technical details. But now it's more like how you can use this service for your project. So how do you make changes to this configuration? So what you have to do at the moment is fork the .eclipse. Sorry, I made a typo. It should be Eclipse FDN repo, of course. Then create a branch with your changes in the configuration file and create a pull request to the upstream repository. Yeah? But before you make this PR, you will probably would like to go to this dashboard to look at the current configuration in some nice way, I would say. So again, if you take a look there, please, any feedback is welcome. So that was our first approach for that, for this dashboard kind of thing. But of course, this can be changed and changed to your needs. So that's just like the first version. So there you find a link to the current configuration where you see, for example, all the repositories with all the settings, whether they already have branch protection rules, if, for example, secret scanning is enabled, and stuff like that. Another thing that is quite interesting is the playground. It allows you to play around with the snippets and see what is the resulting configuration. So in this case, for example, I was creating a snippet to create a branch protection rule for the main branch, and just adapting one specific setting, otherwise taking all the settings from the default. So you see on the right then what this actually means. So yeah, you see all the settings that that will be taken into account. But as a rule, additionally, this one setting is modified. So the required approving re-recount, for example, is set to 1 instead of 2, which is a default. So if you would not provide there this override, then you would see a value of 2. Okay, so yeah. So again, going back to making these changes. So fork the repo, then create the changes, create a pull request. In this case, for example, I just changed the description of, I think, the organization. What will happen then afterwards? You created the pull request. So there will an automatic workflow being run that will add comments to the PR, indicating the changes that this PR will bring to the configuration in some diff-like manner. So that's usually quite useful for us to review this change, but also for yourself. For example, project leads would like to take a look there, or fellow colleagues take a look, does this make sense, or shouldn't you do this and that? then this view is actually quite easy to understand what's going to happen, and you can suggest changes to that. So this workflow is not super fast, so it takes roughly a minute. So if you make a PR, wait a minute, and normally this comment is added. Then you can take a look if all the changes are as you expect them. I think that's also quite useful for the start when you have not had much experience with this self-service so far. And then after approval of the PR, so which will be done by some Eclipse Foundation staff, the changes will be merged. And at the moment, they will still be manually applied. Manually applying means the tool is run, which has to be done at the moment still manually. But yeah, it's not much hassle. But yeah, we are working on making this automatic. But for now, it's manual. So that's how it looks like for example, then for EF stuff when he runs the tool. So when he applies the latest configuration, he will see also the changes there again in some diff-like view. If there are some unrelated changes that are not expected, then of course you can react to that and make sure that only the relevant changes are being made. Because for now it can happen that some people have made changes still through the web UI. And then, of course, if you would apply the tool without the tool knowing about these changes, they would be overwritten. So that's why every time you apply the changes, you will see everything that's going to happen. And if something is reported that is not expected, then you, of course, have to correct that. So that's a safeguard for now. Hopefully, in the future, when we have more like an automatic monitoring of that, this is less of an issue. For now, it's every time you run the tool, you should check if all the changes that are going to happen are really the one that are expected. Okay, another thing that is also quite important to mention, in case you are afraid, the tool will by default not delete anything. So if you run the tool, even if you delete something from your configuration, the tool will warn you about that, but it will not actually delete it. In order to delete it, you really have to run the tool with a certain flag and then confirm again. So the chances of something being deleted is relatively low. Also something that is quite interesting to know, GitHub has now support for restoring repositories that have been deleted. So even in the case of something going really wrong, you most likely can restore even repositories, but of course we would like to avoid it at all costs, of course. Okay. Then maybe coming to the approval rules, which might be quite interesting, is by default, of course, we do all kinds of sanity checks for pull requests that are being opened. So first of all, who created this pull request? Is this already a committer or project lead of the project? Is the pull request or is the change valid? So basically, the tool will also have all kinds of validation rules, and if some of the validations are violated, then of course it will not allow to apply the changes, and this is also visible in the PR comments. And another thing is, of course, the type of change. So if somebody requests, for example, I would like to delete this repository, then of course we question that, and normally in cases like that are a bit more sensitive, we require some additional approval by project lead, but this also depends on the project. And so with the projects that already use it, so we have some informal rules already set up. So some projects, for example, they said if certain requests come from this guy, then just approve it because I fully trust this guy. Other projects are like, I require at least for every change an approval from a project lead. So that's very informal at the moment, which is not ideal, of course. So we would like to make this formalized. and then hopefully the tool will also automatically take these approval rules into account. But that's future. That's not for now. For now, we take a look at every PR and then decide based on the nature of the PR how to proceed. Yeah, so that's the status. Yeah, maybe to outline a bit the next steps for the tool. So one of the big things that we would like to do is right now it's a command line tool that is also integrated into workflows on GitHub to run all kinds of things, like you've seen this validation and this diff view. But ideally, this should run as a complete GitHub app to automatically react on certain things. So that's what we work on, because that also means that we would not have to maintain tokens for each organization ourselves, which would be a big plus. Another thing, as I already said, so we would like to formalize the way we apply these approval rules. So I'm a big fan of not one size fits all. So it should be like really project based. So one project would like to have it like that, another project like that, and we should support that because every project is different. Another thing that is quite important for us as a security team, we would like to have better monitoring and alerting capabilities if some things in organizations are set in a way that is maybe not security best practice, or we would like to improve on a foundation level. So all our projects should have this. For example, something that we started now is we would like to enable for all repositories secret scanning, because it's something offered by GitHub for free that has very low false positives as far as I understand, but brings value. So it tries to prevent or at least warn you if some secrets are pushed to a repo, and yeah, is visible to everyone, of course. And another thing that is also on our roadmap is to make it a real Eclipse project. So right now it's open source, of course, but it's not an Eclipse project. But of course, in the long term, it would be good to have this as a real Eclipse project. Okay, so that's all from my side. So if you have any questions, then please. Maybe something that I would like to